The bones of the presentation are good, but there's just not enough there. Be more transparent. I need you to be more professional. Get that through your skull. This whole casual act, I can see right through you.
You know when you're trying to give feedback and all of a sudden you notice that your palms are sweaty, your knees are weak, your arms are spaghetti? Okay, that's the beginning of an Eminem song, but why should you even care about giving feedback? What we find is that feedback is the #1 skill, not just for leaders to run a company, but it's also one of the #1 skills of great employees. Not only because they build trust by telling the truth, but they're also working to get better every day. And they're constantly sharing feedback with their superiors about how to make that happen, therefore putting themselves up for a promotion. Now, if you're thinking, I don't really care about work, this also may help you if you're trying to tell somebody that they have spinach in their teeth. So today, we're gonna talk about two things. The first is why feedback is so dang hard. And the second thing we're gonna talk about is our 5-part model for giving feedback. So why is giving feedback so dang hard? Well, the first thing is that it triggers our basic survival instincts. Basically have this protocol, which is that we are trying to maximize pleasure and minimize danger. And as a result, we're constantly seeking moments that make us feel good, and we avoid things that make us feel uncomfortable. Now, what's really interesting is that our limbic system, which is where our fight or flight lives, it can process information in just under 1/5 of a second, which means we're picking up tiny cues from people and the environment all the time to understand, are we in danger? Are we uncomfortable? And what's wild is when we're in a feedback conversation, we tend to not only pick up on the other person's discomfort, but because we have mirror neurons, which helps us match the other person's energy, we get uncomfortable, they get even more uncomfortable, and all of a sudden you spiral out into a situation where nobody's feeling good at all. And then when you're in this fight or flight response, you have to try to say something intelligent, thoughtful, direct, and specific, and it doesn't necessarily come out. So we basically need to get to a place where we can calm down our autonomic nervous system and feel okay and in control. Now, another piece here is that the part of the brain that registers critical feedback is the same part of the brain that registers pain. And so in many ways, when you are giving someone feedback, they can tend to receive it like a little punch in the head. And what do people do when they're threatened? They tend to punch back. They get defensive. They share feedback about you. They start to get aggressive, or worse, they run. And that makes us even more uncomfortable. And so you can see how this situation can get really messy really fast. Now, the second thing that also contributes to feedback being particularly awkward and uncomfortable is that we have never really been taught how to do it in a way that feels good. What we typically see is that people are giving feedback to folks when they're not in a place to receive it. What happens is that when we give feedback, it tends to be when we want to give feedback, not when that person is ready to receive the information. And so I'd like to demonstrate what the average feedback situation looks like through the lens of water.
All right, so let's go ahead and do a little experiment. I'm in my kitchen, I'm wearing my experimentation shirt, and I'm ready to rock. So I want you to pretend there's someone named Steve at work. Steve has had a really busy day, but Steve also needs to receive feedback from their boss. The problem is they are full of information, experiences, and mistakes they've been making on the presentations, which is why we're here for feedback in the first place. So their boss shows up feeling particularly relaxed, which is why they feel like this is a good time to give feedback. Says Steve, hey, next time you build that presentation, you mind making it better? Well, Steve all of a sudden finds himself spilleth over. He has no room left to receive that feedback, and therefore his cup is full. But I want you to pretend, splishity splash, that Steve shows up on a different day. And we ask Steve, do you have space to receive this feedback? Maybe it's after a long weekend. And all of a sudden, you give him that same feedback, which doesn't look so bad. With that, I'm signing out from my laboratory. Peace.
Now, the other thing we haven't been taught is that most people are not certain how that other person is going to respond. And when we are in an uncertain situation, our brain craves some sort of safety net. And so this is where frameworks can be particularly helpful when you want to approach a situation that could feel potentially uncomfortable, like sharing with your neighbor that you're sick and tired of their hedges constantly being cut in the shape of hearts, hypothetically speaking. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into our 5-part framework for delivering feedback. All right, so let's dive into the 5-part framework for feedback that's going to change everything. It's what we'd like to call tips to name it, frame it, discuss it, and fix it. Now, this framework is something that I always use to prepare for any sort of feedback conversation. From, hey, you've got ketchup on your shirt, to, hey, you didn't deliver the presentation at the right time. Way. Now, let's go ahead and dive into what each of these steps are, and then we'll bring it all together in one big fat example. So let's go ahead with part 1, which is tips. This stands for tone, intention, and permission. Now, many of us just dive bomb into feedback. After lunch, we're feeling sleepy and full, it's an item on our to-do list, and we're ready to rock. But the real truth is you have to prepare and be thoughtful about the way in which you have this conversation, which brings us to number 1, tone. Now, there's a lot of different tones or ways in which you can bring this conversation up from an emotional perspective. You can bring up a, hey, you really messed this thing up. Pretty accusatory, pretty judgmental. Now, we're gonna learn how to remove that judgment and remove that emotion, because often that can create a safer environment for the listener and therefore a better response to the feedback. On the other hand, you could say, hey, I've got something to share and I'd like to share it because I really care about you. Calm, cool, and collected. Now, for those who are delivering feedback in the context of a performance review conversation, like someone's job is on the line, bringing a serious tone to the conversation could be particularly helpful. Now, after tone is what we call intention. Intention is really sharing the why behind the conversation. Sharing feedback without your intention can sometimes feel like an attack. So there's a big difference between saying, hey, I need to tell you, you really aren't connecting with the team, versus, hey, I want to share this bit of feedback with you because I want to make sure that you connect with the team in the right way. Feels very different, lands very different. You are sharing your why. Thanks, Simon Sinek. So then let's talk about permission. Permission is really about asking people, hey, is this a good time for me to share some thoughts or feedback with you about X? Now, this is controversial. Some people like to do this, some don't. I like to do it because oftentimes you can catch people in a place where they're not really ready to hear it. They're in between meetings, or emotionally they're just not in the right place for it, in which case you've given an option to opt out. Or by saying yes, you're really asking them to opt in. So this is our part 1, tips. Tone, intention, and permission. And these are gonna get you set up for the right kind of conversation. Next up is what we call the name it, or part 2 of the model. Name it is really about naming the feedback without any sort of emotion or judgment involved. The reason we do this is because we want to make sure that people can hear just the facts, that we have a good chance of them actually listening to what we have to say because we haven't triggered any sort of emotional defensive response. And most importantly, we want to make sure that we're really clear on the issue at hand. An example of using name it is, hey, I noticed you showed up at 3 p.m. when the meeting started at 2 p.m. Now, in doing this, again, it's a fact. You can't really argue with it. And more importantly, that person, again, is going to stay calm. Best practice to get started with this step is you can start with, I've observed that, or I have noticed that. All right, step 3 is what we call frame it. This is truly about making sure that folks are clear on the impact of their actions. This is really about focusing on the way that it either makes you feel, the way that it's going to impact the team, or the way it might impact their role or their job or their relationships. Now, an example of this is if you give feedback to someone like, hey, I've noticed you showed up at 3 p.m., the meeting started at 2. The impact of this was that we missed the ability to give a presentation to the rest of the organization, and it's gonna be another month before we can share with them, and therefore we delay the project. This is very different than, and it pissed me off, right? So the magic phrases here to get going with this are, the impact of this was, or as a result, we, or as a result, I feel. Let's move on to part 4 of the model, which is discuss it. Now, I joke that this is weirdly the easiest and hardest part. This is where you actually sit back and listen. As I mentioned earlier, listening can be harder and take more energy than speaking. This is where you give the person time to digest, time to grapple with this new information, and time to talk aloud to either share more context about why they may be doing that behavior or really work through what they've heard. At this point, this is their time to pour out the water in their cup and really create more space for solutioning in just a second. Again, the hardest part for you is actually to say nothing at all. So last but not least is fix it. This is really where you're creating a solution to the actual feedback at hand. Because when we're feeling stressed, tired, exhausted, it's hard to come up with a plan. This is where you get them started on the path forward. A lot of issues with feedback conversations is that people do not create a plan for the person receiving feedback, and they leave feeling even more lost than when they arrived. So there's two approaches you can take to the fix it stage. One is that you lead. You're the one sharing solutions. I highly suggest you lead when someone's in a serious performance situation, meaning if they knew what to do, they probably would have been already doing it. Or they're at risk of being fired, in which case you want to be really clear what you need to see from them and what they need to be doing. The other option here is that they lead the solutioning. You could ask them, hey, what do you think you can do moving forward? Like the situation for being late. If they're late, you can say, hey, how do you think you're going to make sure you're not late again? If watching them own the solution is going to be a really great step to know that they're going to work on it in the future. Now, what's important about this is that once you come up with the solution, asking them, what do you think? Or how does that feel to you? Really matters, because you need their buy-in to make sure they're committing to taking the steps to improve upon that feedback. So let's go ahead and put this all together, all right? We basically have a situation, let's pretend that a colleague is constantly interrupting other people. So this colleague is a peer of mine, which often can be a really hard time to give feedback, but I've noticed that their interruptions are absolutely inappropriate and it's starting to really wear on people. So let's go ahead and get started. Step one is going through my tips. The tone, I want to keep it light. I'm not their boss. The intention is to let them know because I would want to know. If people were talking about this behind my back at work, if this was somehow eroding my ability to build trust, teams, or get promoted, I would absolutely want to be told. So I'm treating them as I would want to be treated. And last but not least, I'm going to make sure that I ask if it's cool if I share something with them. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in.
I'm sorry to pull you on a call after the call we were just on.
Yo, well, what up? All good?
Yeah, so basically, I wanted to share something with you that I noticed in the meeting that I thought might be helpful moving forward. You have a sec?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I noticed that you cut off both Sarah and Joanna about 6 times. And the impact of that was that I noticed that they stopped sharing their ideas, and we really needed their thoughts to finish this report we've got going on.
Really? I didn't even realize I did that.
Yeah. So I had an idea if it might be helpful for how to manage that moving forward, because I know the feeling of having those impulses and wanting to make sure they get heard.
Okay. Yeah, shoot.
I usually write down my ideas on a piece of paper right next to me and save them until the end of a thought or comment.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, let me noodle on it. Yeah, this is news, but I appreciate you bringing it to me. I don't want to delay us or be a bad teammate. So yeah, it's nice of you to tell me.
No, I got you.
All right, so hopefully it was helpful to see all of those things come together. As a recap, in the 5-part model for feedback, you've got tips to name it, frame it, discuss it, and fix it. And at the end of the day, the single most important thing that's going to guarantee your success is practice. Fun fact, confidence, as we define it at Mindy, is really about your belief in your ability to do a task. And your confidence with feedback will grow if you practice. So to close, feedback is hard. And it's hard because our brains are wired for safety and comfort, and giving feedback is inherently uncomfortable because we're telling someone that if they already knew, they probably wouldn't be doing. It's also uncomfortable because we were never taught how. But now you've got a cheat sheet, and hopefully this is something you can use whenever you've got to give some hard news to somebody you care about. Now, I always like to define the difference between nice and kind here, because a lot of people think feedback can be unkind. The difference between nice and kind is this. Being nice is about maintaining some sort of social interaction or relationship. Being kind is about doing something for somebody else. It's about wanting to do something that's in their best interest. If you're truly interested in somebody else's development, growth, and/or longevity with a company or in a relationship, it's essential that you give them feedback. So as a challenge, I'd like you to use this framework in the next week. Now, if you're thinking, I don't need to give feedback, I don't report to anybody, again, feedback can be to a partner, to not leave their dishes in the sink. Whatever it is, make sure that you practice in the next week, and before you give that feedback, you practice on your own. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and mind. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'll see y'all next week on Your Brain Explained. I hope you have a great one. And little feedback for you. Take notes next time.